The Superscope Storyteller presents The Selfish Giant.
Long ago, in a faraway land, there was a mean giant who had a very beautiful garden in front of his castle. One day, the giant went away, and while he was gone, the young children of the neighborhood played in the giant's garden. It was a lovely garden with soft green grass. There were flowers of every color and shape that filled the air with the most wonderful fragrances. There were 12 peach trees that in the springtime blossomed into delicate pink and pearl flowers, and in the autumn bore rich, ripe fruit. The birds sat in the trees and sang so sweetly that the children used to stop their games just to listen to them.
How happy we are here! And how nicely the birds sing to us!
After some time, the giant returned. He had been off to visit his friend, the ogre, for 7 years. He finally decided to return to his castle, and when he saw the children playing in his garden, he became angry.
What are you doing here? This is my garden. Get out! All of you, go away! Nobody can play in this garden but me!
The frightened children ran away. The selfish giant built a high wall around his garden and put up a large sign which read, "Children keep out." Now the poor children had nowhere to play. The road was dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not want to play there. Then they wandered around the walls of the garden and wished they could come inside and play once again. It was a long, cold winter that year, and the children stayed in their houses. Then springtime came, and all over the country the flowers blossomed and the birds returned. But in the garden of the selfish giant, it was still winter. There were no birds to sing in his garden because there were no children there, and the trees didn't blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the sign that said, "Children keep out," it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back under the ground and went to sleep. The only people who were pleased to see the sign were the snow and the frost.
Spring has forgotten this garden, so we will live here all year long.
The snow covered up all the grass with her great white cloak, and the frost painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to come visit them. He was wrapped in furs, and he roared around the garden all day long.
What a delightful place this is. We must ask the hail to join us.
And so they did, and hail came to the garden. Every day for 3 hours, he rattled on the roof of the giant's house until he had broken all the slates. He was dressed in gray, and his breath was like ice. Every day the selfish giant looked out of his window.
I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming. I hope there will be a change in the weather.
But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but to the selfish giant's garden, she gave nothing.
He is too selfish, and without the children in his garden, it will always be winter there.
One morning, the giant awoke to some lovely music outside his window. When he looked out the window, all he saw was a small bird singing in a tree. He had not heard a bird sing in so long that to him it was the most beautiful music in the world. The hail had stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind had stopped roaring. The giant put his head out the window, and the most wonderful fragrance came to him.
Spring has come at last.
He looked around his garden and saw the most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children had crept in and were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree that he could see, there was a little child, and the trees were so happy to have children back in them that they had covered themselves with blossoms. The birds were flying about and singing, and the flowers were looking up through the green grass and laughing. But in one corner of the garden, it was still winter. There was one little boy who was too small to climb the tree. The tree bent down as far as it could, but it was not low enough for the little boy to climb up. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing her branches around. The little boy began to cry. Seeing this, the giant's heart began to melt.
How selfish I have been. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will help the poor little boy into the tree.
He was really very sorry for what he had done and wanted to tell the children. So he crept down the stairs and opened the front door. But when the children saw him, they became frightened and ran from the garden. Suddenly it became winter again. The little boy, however, did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. The giant took him gently in his arms and placed him in the tree. Then the tree blossomed at once, and the birds came and sang in its branches. The little boy stopped crying. He flung his arms around the giant's neck and gave him a kiss. When the other children saw the giant was not wicked any longer, they came back into the garden, and with them came the spring. The giant smiled as he spoke.
It is your garden now. From this day on, you shall play in my garden whenever you like. I will knock down the walls.
All day long they played in the garden. When evening came and it was time to bid the giant goodbye, the giant was very concerned.
But where is the little boy I lifted into the tree?
The children all looked at each other.
We do not know. He did not say where he lives, and we have never seen him before.
You must tell him to come tomorrow, for I would like to see him.
Every afternoon when school was over, the children came and played with the giant in the garden. But when the little boy of whom the giant was so fond never returned, the giant became very sad. Years went by, and the giant grew old and feeble. He could not play with the children anymore, but sat in a large chair and watched them scamper about his garden.
I have many beautiful flowers, but the children are the most beautiful flowers of all.
One winter morning, he looked out his window as he was dressing. He did not hate winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep, and that the flowers were resting. Suddenly, he rubbed his eyes and looked in wonder at the farthest corner of the garden. There was a tree with golden branches and silver fruit, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. The giant ran downstairs and out into the garden. He ran across the grass, trembling with excitement, and went to the child.
Where have you been? Has anyone harmed you? Tell me, and I will take my sword and slay him.
The child smiled at the giant.
No, nobody has harmed me.
A strange awe came over the giant, and he knelt before the little boy. The child smiled at the giant and kissed him as he had before.
You let me play in your garden once. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise.
Tears of joy were rolling down the giant's cheeks as he put the little boy on his shoulder. He turned to see a stairway that ascended into the clouds. And as he began to climb, he smiled, because he knew the happiness that awaited him in paradise.